ago.
What's up, family? Here we go. Breaking news.
Involving 4 victims. I'm here to inform you that the Cook County State's Attorney's Office will no longer be pursuing these indictments. Back in 2019, I stood in this very room and asked for anyone who was a victim or witness to crimes allegedly perpetrated by Mr. Kelly to come forward. Since that time, we've set up a hotline to allow for victims and witnesses, both locally and nationally, to contact our office with any information that they received. In the course of the several weeks after that plea for survivors to come forward, we received hundreds of tips and pieces of evidence that spread far and wide throughout the country. My team of assistant attorneys and victim witnesses who are here today, and I will introduce them momentarily, worked tirelessly to run down the accusations that were being made to determine whether the information was being provided was credible. In the course of that time, we received evidence, physical evidence, including a tape of child pornography involving Mr. Kelly that was subsequently used in his trial, federal trial here in Chicago. Our victim witness staff and assistant state's attorneys traveled throughout the United States, meeting with survivors in their homes and talking with them, many of whom had lost faith in the criminal legal system, that their stories would be heard. As a result of that, we filed our charges on February 22nd, 2019. And subsequently, charges were filed in the Eastern District of New York, in federal court, as well as the Northern District of Illinois. Since that time, Mr. Kelly was convicted in 2021 of 9 counts of racketeering predicated on criminal conduct, including the sexual exploitation of children, forced labor, and violations involving the coercion and transportation of women and girls in interstate commerce to engage in illegal sexual activity by a federal grand jury in Brooklyn, New York. That court sentenced Mr. Kelly to 30 years in prison on June 29th, 2022. As you all are aware, here in Illinois, the Illinois Federal Court in September of 2022, the jury found Mr. Kelly guilty on 3 counts of child pornography and 3 counts of child enticement. Sentencing has not yet been rendered in that case. However, Mr. Kelly faces a minimum of 10 to 90 years in prison in the Illinois Federal Court. I want to reiterate our office's support of the investigations that led to the charges and convictions, both in the Eastern District of New York and the Northern District of Illinois. It is to that end that due to the extensive sentences that these convictions hold, our office has decided not to continue to expend our limited resources and court time with the indictments that we previously charged Mr. Kelly. I want to first and foremost thank the survivors that came forward and shared their stories. I know firsthand how difficult it is for you to tell your stories. 4 years ago, I stood at this podium and shared my story of having been a survivor and my full understanding of what it means to have to go before strangers to discuss what is arguably one of the most horrific experiences one could have. And these women, all of them Black, came forward believing that they would be heard. As a survivor, I know that the courage that it took for them to come forward, and I know that for those who were seeking to have their day in court here in Illinois, that today's announcement may be disappointing. But I want to acknowledge that when we brought these charges forward, we brought them because we believed the allegations to be credible, and we believe that they deserve to have the opportunity to have the allegations heard. These women, both those who are named in our indictments and the women in New York and the Northern District of Illinois, are to be commended for their bravery and their relentless pursuit of justice, no matter how long it took. I also want to point out that the women who stand with me today, Tanae McCoy Cummings, Stephanie Coelho, Jackie Griffin, Ann McCord Rogers, and Krista Peterson, who is not with us, work in our sexual assault and domestic violence division. Every day, these women come in contact with survivors and victims of sexual abuse and sexual assault whose cases don't make the headlines. Their abusers, or those for whom they accuse, are not Grammy Award-winning artists. Sometimes they're teachers, deacons, folks that they know from the neighborhood. And the attention that this case garnered, the reason that it was so significant for this office is not simply because Mr. Kelly was a man of celebrity, but because of the victims and survivors that we see each and every day in this office, many of whom are people of color, particularly Black and Latino women who do not believe that the justice system, even as victims, sees them. This office sees them. And I wanted to make sure that the announcement today and the fact that we are no longer going to continue to pursue these cases is not an indication that we don't see them. Every day, the relentless work of the people of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and our Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Unit sees and hears these survivors and actively work on their behalf to bring them justice. We believe in a victim-centered approach where we recognize the needs of our survivors and recognize that sometimes justice is served even when there is no conviction. I want to personally thank my team for their efforts throughout the past 4 years, for their collaboration.
This is fair use for the purposes. Warning, federal law allows citizens to reproduce, distribute, or exhibit portions of copyrighted motion pictures, videotapes, or video discs under certain circumstances without authorization of the copyright holder. This is called fair use. For purposes of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and property, doesn't infringe on copyright under 17 U.S.C. 107. I repeat, this is fair use.
With our colleagues throughout the country and for their tireless pursuit of justice on behalf of survivors of sexual assault. With that, I'll take your questions.
Do you think this sends the right message in a case like this?
Mr. Kelly is potentially looking at the possibility of never walking out of prison again for the crimes that he's committed. This office, in the pursuit of justice for the victims in our indictment, as well as those across the country, worked tirelessly to get us to this point. While today's cases are no longer being pursued, we believe that justice has been served and sentences that have already been handed down to Mr. Kelly, as well as the sentence that will come down next month. The message that we are sending, that I want to be unequivocally clear, is that we take allegations of sexual abuse and sexual assault seriously. We will work tirelessly to bring justice, and we believe that in this case, justice has been served. Certainly, as I indicated back in 2019, we pulled together a hotline to allow for us to take calls from across the country for those who were making allegations or said that they had witnessed behaviors of Mr. Kelly. That phone line alone required the resources of our assistant state's attorneys, victim witness staff, and administrators to go through those calls to be able to validate the calls that were being made. Additionally, as I said, we had assistant state's attorneys and victim witness staff travel to places like New York, to Atlanta, Minnesota, to meet with victims and to meet with our colleagues. Additionally, preparing for our indictments and sitting again with our victims and their families to go over the evidence that we had. And over the course of the trials that were happening both in New York and Chicago, our assistant state's attorneys were working in tandem. And so it took a tremendous amount of resources over the course of the last 4 years. And we believe that those were resources well spent. But as I said earlier, we have a significant number of cases and survivors who are equally in need of the resources that have been expended for Mr. Kelly's cases.
Can you expand a little bit for the timing of this announcement? Why not wait until everyone's sentencing hearing?
Certainly, we have been following along with this case or the cases since the inception. We have, after Mr. Kelly was found guilty in the Northern District, been talking as a team about how we would move forward with our state charges. We also wanted to have an opportunity to talk to the victims who are in our indictments about the possibility of moving forward. Again, we wanted to take a victim-centered approach and put the needs of our victims at the forefront. And so while we recognize that there is a court date next month, we do know that there's already a sentence in play of 30 years. We did not believe that it would be in the interest of justice, in the interest of our survivors, and the use of our resources to continue to allow for the sentencing here in Chicago to take place before ultimately making the decision. This decision was made in consultation with our survivors named in the indictment.
Are you able to share any of their reactions without giving, obviously, the information and kind of conversation? But just these victims who, as you mentioned, so courageously came forward, were willing to tell their story, did tell their story with some great charges. That this case wouldn't be going forward and ultimately wouldn't be getting justice.
Certainly, I would say that there was no consistency in reaction. We do have a survivor who is disappointed that she would not have her day in court. Some of our survivors, some of those who have been named in our petitions, have had justice in courtrooms that were not here in the Cook County State House. And for them, the process and going through this process was very difficult, and they are pleased with the outcome related to the sentence and the judgment against Mr. Kelly.
Fair use.
But for those who did not have an opportunity to put their hand on the Bible, or who have felt for the last 20 years that their pain was not recognized, certainly this is a disappointing day for them. We didn't do a cost, monetary cost benefit analysis, Charlie. We simply looked at the fact that the likelihood of Mr. Kelly being released from prison anytime in the near future and having been held accountable for his actions and the use of our limited resources would require that we put those resources in advocacy for other survivors of sexual abuse and assault. Anyone else? I believe there's a state case out of Minnesota that is still pending. Yeah. I'm pausing because it's not about money or time. The allegations that were made against Mr. Kelly and the things for which he was accused of having done. As a survivor, I can tell you there is not a dollar amount or an amount of time that I would want for someone to bring justice for me. The reality of the situation was, in looking at the cases as they have proceeded through the courts for the last 4 years, and the impact that that may have evidentiary on our cases as well, the fact that some of our survivors have been in other cases as well, and that Mr. Kelly is looking at significant jail time, we believe that justice and accountability has been served. As it relates to the one case with the survivor who is disappointed by today's actions is in no way to signify that we did not find her allegations to be credible. That is why we brought them. It is in no way to signify that our actions today mean that her pain and her case was no less significant than the others. It is simply to say that Mr. Kelly is looking at significant jail time and that there are survivors, hundreds of survivors, whose files remain on our desks, and they require the dedication and commitment of these Assistant State's Attorneys, victim witness staff that stand with me and in our offices today. That was the calculation that we did.
Family, I want y'all input on this now.
victims ever a realistic prospect in these cases?
You know, these cases took off rather quickly. We charged Mr. Kelly back in February of 2020.
Are you confident that had your office been chosen to take these cases to trial, you would have been able to secure convictions?
We brought the charges believing that we had sufficient evidence to support findings of guilt in the court of law. That's why we brought them.
Is there any concern, something might have occurred, what is that, federal, or given rise to do it?
Our concern always was getting justice and accountability for the survivors. And what we knew, given that there were multiple jurisdictions that were looking at Mr. Kelly, we wanted to work collaboratively. This was not a who got there first. Certainly, we worked very hard and very diligently. Everything that we had, we shared. I can't say enough about the collaborative nature that we have with this office with our federal partners in New York and Chicago. We shared our information. And so we were being strategic, understanding that whomever was ready first and the federal charges would go first, and we would let the cases play themselves out and again evaluate at the conclusion of those cases how we would proceed forward. But there was never a concern of whether one would jump in or the other. This was a coordinated, collaborative effort from the very beginning.
And just to be extremely clear on the logistics, the intention is to go into the trial of court hearing and dismiss the charges.
That is correct. I was in contact with Mr. Kelly's lawyer, Jennifer Bonjean, approximately 2 weeks ago and informed her that we were looking to do this. We wanted to make sure that we spoke one additional time with the victims alleged in our indictments. I told her then our team is aware that we would go into court tomorrow and ask that the charges be dismissed.
How long the conversations they were behind closed doors about this decision?
A lot have gone into this decision. There's the legal and there's the tears and there's the frustration. We've been talking all along, certainly, as I said, at the conclusion of the federal trial here in Chicago, we knew that the clock was ticking. We had a judge who certainly has indicated that he wanted the cases to move along. We had a defendant who certainly was entitled to have his day in court. And we had survivors, some waiting as many as 20 years for this day. And so we started talking very early about the sufficiency of the evidence, the information that came out in the other trials, the impact that they would have on our cases should we move forward. I personally spoke to the victims in this case to gauge from them what they wanted to do, took that under consideration and advisement, spoke with our team continually, and reached the decision within the last couple